So hello and what's up, good people. So welcome to my space. Yama Inspires. I'm a digital content creator. I'm a clinician, and I'm also a graphic designer and a digital marketer who deals with furniture accessories. So today, guys, I'm going to talk about the process of erection. So the process of erection usually occurs in men, as you know that. I don't wanna use vulgar language. Let me use medical language to explain that. Because I wanna behave like a daktari because I'm a daktari. So for us to understand how masturbation brings somebody, it's good to know what really happens physiologically. What's the physiological basis of what's the physiological basis of what happens in a man in terms of sexual behaviors, or in terms of coitus, what really happens for a man to be in a sexual act. And that's what we are calling erection. We know, I don't want to use that Swahili language. I want to be professional kidogo. So any sexual behavior is usually controlled by the central nervous system. The central nervous system is a part of the brain. So the brain consists of what we call very complex systems. But let me base on this particular discussion. Let me base on two systems: the autonomic nervous system and the limbic system, because autonomic nervous system and limbic system is what controls most of these sexual behaviors, and particularly in this particular episode, erection. So the autonomic nervous system is classified into the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic nervous system controls flight response. Ukiona lion, ni nini inaweza fanya ukimbie ukiona danger? You release a chemical called norepinephrine. Hiyo ndio wanaitanga adrenaline. In medical school we call it norepinephrine or epinephrine. Norepinephrine is the proactive form of epinephrine. Norepinephrine ndio wanaitanga noradrenaline. Epinephrine is what we call adrenaline. Okay? We also have the limbic system, and the limbic system is where we have this particular nuclei which control emotions and behaviors. So these particular behaviors include sexual behaviors, feeding behaviors, etc. So within the brain, within the autonomic nervous system, we have a system called the parasympathetic nervous system. Now the parasympathetic nervous system releases as particular nerve. You see, within the brain, for the brain to communicate with the sexual organs, it has to send connections, and these particular wires or connections are what we are calling nerves. So the parasympathetic nervous system sends its nerves to the genitalia, and those nerves releases a particular chemical called acetylcholine. Sasa tuseme sasa hii ndio, this is where we have the parasympathetic nervous system. So inatuma hizo nerves zinafika to the genitalia, and now we see how the penis structure, or how the penis of a man is structured. It's a spongy muscle tissue. It's a smooth muscle tissue. It's spongy, ni kama mattress, and that spongy muscle tissue is where we have is specifically known as the corpora cavernosum, not corpus, corpora cavernosum, and the corpora spongiosum. So within that particular smooth muscle tissue is where we have a connection of nerves and veins. So these veins and arteries. So we have number one, the vasculature supply and the nerve supply. Sawa. So the the main artery yenye nataka ujue hapa, nataka ujue internal pudendal artery. That's the main artery which supplies the corpus and the bulbous artery. The bulbous artery and the internal pudendal artery, hizo ndio nataka ushike for now. The internal pudendal artery is what supplies the corpus cavernosum. The corpora cavernosum. Corpora cavernosum niyo muscle ya yenye sasa inakuanga smooth, yenye inatengeneza hiyo the penile structure of the penis. And I also want you to note of the internal bulbous artery. The bulbous artery is what supplies the urethra and the bulbous tissue. We also have the bulbous. The bulbous tissue ni sasa yenye iko outer. You see the corpus cavernosum and the corpus spongiosum ziko ndani, but the bulbous tissue iko nje. Like the bulbous tissue is a skeletal muscle tissue, iko nje. But now the corpus cavernosum and the corpus spongiosum and the corpora cavernosum are the inner smooth muscle tissues of the penis. So what happens is that once the parasympathetic nervous system sends its signals via nerves to the penile structure, that particular nerve, it must pass through the spinal cord, because the spinal cord is also a part of the central nervous system, particularly the sacral region. This is the sacral region of the spinal cord. Huku chini ya lamba ni huku. So huku chini is where we have the sacral portion of the spinal cord. So the sacral portion of so from the brain to the sacral part of the spinal cord, now it sends that connection to the what? To the penile structure. And what happens is that that particular nerve releases a chemical called acetylcholine. Now acetylcholine is a chemical, and we call it in medical school, we call it a neurotransmitter. A neurotransmitter is a chemical which acts on a cell, you see, to trigger that cell to do a certain physiological process. So under microscopic level, acetylcholine will act on those cells on those smooth muscle cells within the corpora cavernosum. And what will happen, let's zoom in on one cell. So what will happen is that once that chemical binds on a cell, you see, when a chemical binds on a cell, it binds on structures called receptors. Receptors ni kama uchukue key na uchukue kufuli. Key ni receptor, alafu kufuli ndio cell. Sawa sawa. So once it binds, it will trigger that intracellular. So once that particular chemical binds, that chemical acts as a ligand, and then we have the receptor. So it will activate that receptor. Once it activates that receptor, now acetylcholine leads to a certain physiological process which converts a chemical called arginine into citrulline and nitric oxide. So what does acetylcholine does? Acetylcholine will bind on the receptors of those corpora cavernosum cells, and it will trigger a physiological process. What is this particular physiological process? It's actually a physiobiochemical process. So within the cell is where biochemical processes occur. So this particular biochemical process is about breaking down a chemical called arginine. Arginine is actually an amino acid. So arginine is now broken down by acetylcholine into citrulline and nitric oxide. Nitric oxide. In high school chemistry, we talked about nitrogen and its compounds. For those who remember nitrogen and its compound, nitric oxide is an oxide of nitrogen. So what will happen is that nitric oxide is actually the main particular chemical which now triggers erection. Because what will happen is that nitric oxide will trigger some transduction pathways, and these pathways now usually lead to, number one, for those who went to medical school, when hatujafanya medicine mtani excuse kidogo, because I must say that. So it will trigger a transduction pathway, and this particular pathway leads to influx of potassium ion into those cells. And from a medical perspective, what potassium ion does, potassium ion leads to vasodilation of smooth muscles. In other words, it leads to expansion of this particular smooth muscles. So what will happen is that the corpora cavernosum smooth muscle will start expanding, or it will start. Vasodilation is about expansion, vasoconstriction is about contraction. So it will vasoconstrict those particular muscles. That is the corpora cavernosum. Corpora cavernosum tumesema it's a smooth muscle within the what? Within the penile structure. So what will happen is that once this particular muscle relaxes, what will happen is that that particular muscle, it relax, so the penile structure will appear bigger. Sasa itakuwa imecontract. Sasa ndio maana mtu akirect inakuwa that particular way. So what will happen is that once it starts contracting, inaanza kufinya the veins. You see, the veins are the one which draw blood from an organ. So ikianza kufinya hizo veins, inazifunika. Ikizifunika, blood will not be able to leave the penile structure. So what is the result? The result is that blood will fill within that particular structure. And when blood fills within that particular structure, now that this is what leads to erection. So guys, that is a medical explanation of how erection occurs. I hope we are together. I will continue breaking down it so that all of us understand. I will use the most simplest language. Wacha nianze na hii from complex physiology ya medical school, but I will continue breaking it down so that all of us understand. So guys, I'm Nyamai Inspires. So follow me on Instagram, Nyamai Inspires, Facebook, Vincent Nyamai, TikTok, Nyamai Inspires, YouTube, Nyamai Inspires Show. We are going to come up with a podcast, and that podcast is called Comrade Fungua Roho. So that podcast will be dealing with we'll be interviewing comrades to, especially on addiction issues, because addiction issue is a problem which is actually burdening most of our university students. Not only masturbation, by the way, even story na drug addiction na gaming nimeharibu vijana sana, and personally I'm an addiction activist. If you follow me on X, I usually expound this more. I'm also on X, that is formerly Twitter, Nyamai Inspires. So follow me on X. Okay guys, follow me, like the video and share it to as many people as possible. So that is it for today guys. Bye.